tape already.
Yeah. Oh, really? I didn't know that. I didn't read the book. Okay, sure. I didn't read the book. Now look.
And you have a big conflict there. And so like
I don't know.
Okay, Boker Tov, everybody. We'll get started. Got bust up the coffee clutch there.
Did you see? Did you hear my Massachusetts of Robin Weinberg was on?
Yes, yes. I got a message from Daniela. Yeah, it's funny.
And how are you? Hi, sweetie pie. How you doing?
Okay, Tov. Okay, Tov. Yeah, we're starting. Yeah. And
You know who he is?
I had that.
He's so interesting.
okay, Tov. Let me see the page number here. Page 2. Okay. Boker Tov, everybody. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's good. Welcome everybody who is here this morning, and also those who are joining us on Zoom. Today, of course, we continue the shiur in Mesillat Yesharim Le'ilu Nishmat Avigdor Chayavram ben Moshe Tzvi ve Rachel Leah. In addition, also for his chut for Shlema today from Malka Bat Sarah and Reuven ben Mina. In the text, we're on page 2 in the second paragraph, which starts with the words Ve'ulam Toldot. Okay, just as a recap, in addition to giving a little background on the book last week, here's extra books up here. In addition to the introduction to the book and the author, we started the book with the Hakdama, the introduction, and came to the point in the very brief few lines that we did so far that many people have come to a conclusion, whether it's purposefully or not, just by happenstance, that, okay, learning about how to do some self-improvement and think about your life, that's for the people who are the dullards, the people who don't have the ability to learn anything, that can learn a little pasuk in the Torah maybe, but they really can't get into it. So we're picking up now is, what is the negative result of that negative approach? V'ulam, toldota min hagazeraot meod. This approach that it's really just for certain types of people and not really for people who have brains in their head is very bad. Lachachamim, both for those who are wise. Ulevilti chachamim. He doesn't say people are foolish. He says those who are not wise. Why? Why is it not good? Ki gorem sheme'ele ume'ele yechsara chasidut amiti v'yakar meod limtzo oto ba'olam. Because both directions, whether a person has the wisdom or doesn't have the wisdom, what you're doing is you're going out of your way to prevent yourself from growth. If you're going out of your way to prevent yourself from growing, you're not going to be able to reach a level of chassidut. Again, I repeat, and I'll say this multiple times over the next many months, chassidut does not mean a hat, a white shirt, and payas. It means piety. You've got to be very clear on this. This is a term that was used starting the time of the Baal Shem Tov with the concept of chassidut when it was born, and we talked about last week. But it is not. That's not what we're talking about here. Now, I want to point out something to you. If you take a look, it's a third line, at least on my printing. It says that the idea of true chassidut will be yakar me'od. Now we know the word in modern Hebrew, yakar means expensive. So what does it mean here? Dear, precious. It's another possible meaning. It actually means rare in this case. Where does he get the word? Where do we get the word? In Shmuel Aleph Parak Gimel. It starts off by saying that Shmuel was the Navi and that the Devar Elokim was Yakar B'yamav or B'yamim Ha'em. It was very rare, meaning that we're not allowed Navi'im at that time. He will borrow words, and we're going to see this along the way today, that he uses a specific word for a reason to have us, at least I think so, to have us jump to another point to understand something deeper, which we're going to come to at least one of those examples today. Now, what happens as a result? You'll have very few wise people who will know these things about how to grow because they don't spend the time on the topic. And on the other hand, you'll have people who don't have necessarily the wisdom and the smarts in their head because they're not able to really acquire. Yeah. Yes, the second paragraph on page 2 says it starts Ve'ulam toldot haminhag, about a few lines down. Is it page 2? Okay. It's in Hebrew, goes right to left. Got it. All right. I can say that to you. You got to be careful who you say things to, right? Okay. Ad she'yadamu rov bnei adam, to the point where most people think shachasidut talui b'amirat mizmorim harbe. If you ask somebody, just ask your friendly neighborhood neighbor, and you ask them, so what do you think? How would you describe, what is someone who's pious? What would they have to do to reach a level of piety? So most people would say, well, it means you got to say a lot of tehillim, viduyim arukim meod, and you stand, you daven when you're saying al chet, or you're saying the daily vidui, if you're davening certain nusach, somot kashim, lots of heavy fast days, utfilot kerach v'sheleg, and going into freezing cold mikvaot. Kulam dvarim asher en hasechel nach bahem. These are senseless actions. They don't bring a person to a level of piety. Hadad shokta. V'chasidut amiti hanirtze v'anechmad rachok mitzior sichlenu. He says like this: what people think, how people perceive the achievement of piety is self-flagellation. It means cold, freezing cold mikvah, and you got to fast for 1,000,000 years. Are there yichidim in the world? Are there individuals who, in fact, that is how they receive or achieve a level of piety? Absolutely. There's an individual in my family's history, not my own family, but my grandmother on my mother's side is from, my mind just went blank, right? Gdansk. And my grandfather's from Drilj. And my grandmother grew up in with the Rebbe, a certain Rebbe, who in his time, he did not eat during the week. He ate for Shabbos, and that was it. He fasted for basically for 40 years. Okay, he was an individual. He was somebody who was like, I actually met someone who was much, much older in the community in Chicago, who actually knew the Rebbe when he was, the name escapes me. It'll come to me about 2 a.m. I'll call you. Every one of you. Ostrovtsa Rebbe, right? Thank you. The Ostrovtsa Rebbe. So I'm sure some of you have heard of him. Huh? You have to check his yichus. I know it's very un-Jewish, but again, he's saying that that's not what Chassidut is. It's not shuckling really hard. So we're going to see about that too. Where does shuckling even come from? The Kuzari mentions that. We're going to talk about that later. So he says none of that is at all what real piety is all about. This is obvious that milte de loram yale de enash lavadate. It's Aramaic, which for what means that things that are not on our mind, that we are not really conscious of, aware of, we're not going to take care of, we're not going to do. In other words, if you are busy doing other things, and you look you know that you're supposed to keep Torah and mitzvot, you know you're supposed to try to do the mitzvot Torah, you know you're supposed to have kavanah dam, you know all these things, but if it's not on the front burner, then it gets sidelined, and sometimes it's forgotten completely. Even though the basics are there for all of us, like I just said, and he said, we all know that we have to do these things. If he's not really involved in understanding all the details, he'll encounter certain things and he will not be aware of them. What's that mean? I like to use the example of Hilchot Shabbat. Let's say, for example, someone is learning Hilchot Shabbat for the first time, or they're learning Hilchot Shabbat. And they're aware of the av melacha, the main category of work, such as you cannot cook. Thou shalt not cook on the Sabbath. Doesn't say that anywhere. You can't cook on Shabbat. But you may not know that there are certain other things that you also can't do that are called toladot, the derivatives. So you may know the general idea, you don't cook on Shabbat. You may not know you can't do X, which is a subcategory. So when you do it, you're not going to know that you did something wrong. He said the same thing is true in learning about yourself. You may know that you have to do X, Y, and Z, but you don't necessarily know that derivatives of those, as you come into them and you encounter problems, that it is a problem. You won't even realize that they're a problem. He's going to get into details of what he's talking about. Right now, again, this is just a general introduction. Next paragraph. Re'eh, ki en divrei hachasidut re'inyanei hayira va'ava v'tarat halev dvarim mutba'im ba'adam. This is a big machloket among philosophers in Jewish thought. Whether or not, first of all, in general, there's a major machloket as to whether or not one should study emunah. Reb Nachman from Breslov, for example, says, absolutely not. There's no reason to study emunah. We believe, we have blind faith. We have other opinions that say, look, it's better you don't have to study it, but because most people really need some basis, you should study it. Others say there's an absolute chovah. The same thing is true as to whether or not we have innately within us the yirah and ahavat Hashem. His opinion is that we do not. He says, what's the difference? So if they're not, they are or they're not. What's the difference? Did anyone have to teach you how to breathe? I'm not joking. Anyone ever have to teach you, unless God forbid you had a breathing problem? Okay, if you had okay. But did anyone ever have to teach you how to eat? Yes, right? Did anyone teach you how to have an appetite? No. Did anyone ever teach you that you need to try to get air? No, your body does certain things innately. You have, because how Hashem created us. Without an appetite, we would starve. Like the Yasser Rebbe, yes. But the fact that it's not innate in us, therefore, we cannot say that we don't need anything, any intermediary, any what's the word I'm looking for? Something that helps us to acquire this knowledge. We cannot say that these kinds of things of how to be a better person, how to be a better Eved Hashem, are going to come naturally to us, just like some other things do, such as sleep, shena, yekitza, hara'ah, hasova. I would say, do people ever have to teach you how to become that you're full? That's your brain sometimes disconnects and doesn't let you know that. Mine does, at least. But in general, we have these certain built-in. There are some people who don't. They actually know a student who does not have a built-in receptor in his brain that tells him he's full. He's always hungry, which is sad. But we have these built-in things, so we don't have to sit there and say, okay, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. Okay, I should be hungry at 4 o'clock this afternoon. We don't have to do that. That's part of how Hashem created us. But when it comes to this self-examination, we have to do something about it. We need things to help us get to the point of self-introspection and growth. I want to go back to the mashal, or the example of someone who's a recovering alcoholic. A recovering alcoholic needs meetings. A recovering alcoholic needs the sismaot, such as a day at a time, let go and let God. All these things, they're not gimmicks. They're things that work. They're things that help the individual. They can't just say, okay, I'm not going to drink anymore. I'm not going to do drugs anymore. Whatever it is, whatever that person's item is, it doesn't just happen by itself. Similarly here as well. That there are ways that not only can we learn, I'm free translating, not only are there ways that we can learn how to grow in various areas, but also how we can preempt problems. Again, I gave the example last week, an alcoholic should not work in a bar. If you're working on Lashon Hara, for example, let's say that's one of your struggles in life. I don't know if I mentioned this group, because it only was last week, but a number of you have been in other shiurim that I've said certain things over the years. I never know when I'm repeating myself or not. I saw a baseball cap that said on the top, tell it to me, and I'll let you know if it's Lashon Hara. I loved it. I was going to buy it. I said, nah, it's probably not appropriate. Unless it worked backwards. So we have this ability to protect ourselves from ourselves, but only if we're aware of it. And if we're not aware of it, we're not going to know that we protect ourselves from ourselves. I just want to do something here on Zoom so that I can make sure that it comes out properly pinned. There we go. There. Okay. So it was pointed out to me that because of the way I do the Zoom, I've been doing always like this, that I'm just like a little square, right? So now it's on a full screen. So now you get to see the whole picture. I know you're all excited now. I'll be signing autographs. Yeah. Actually, on my book, anytime you want to buy. Anyways, moving along. No commercializing here. Can't do that. Okay. So we can preempt this. So that by saying, if you're working on Lashon Hara, there's actually someone called me up. I don't remember. Yeah, it was here. Someone called me up and said, look, I'm really trying. I'm not good at it. I'm really trying. But there's this one friend I have that 100% of the time when we talk, it ends up being Lashon Hara. I said, are you the one starting the Lashon Hara? He says, no. But this other guy, he can't keep his mouth shut. I said, I have a suggestion. Don't talk to him. Or if you talk to him, make sure it's brief. And if it's something Lashon Hara, find a way out of it. In other words, you need to not set yourselves up for failure. Next paragraph. In kain efo. By the way, the word efo with an aleph at the end means therefore. With a hey, it's efo, means where. It's the accent on the first syllable. Efo. The last syllable means therefore. In kain efo. Ech lo yitztarech lehotzi zman al ha'iyun hazeh. How can we not spend time investigating this topic? Ladat amitat hadvarim, to know the truth of the matter. Ladat haderech liknotam ulekaimam, to acquire, and not only to acquire the knowledge of how to do these things, but actually to put it into practice. Me'ayin tavo hachochma hazot belev adam im lo yivakshena. Where is this knowledge going to come from if we don't seek it out? He chose the word yivakshena, levakesh, for a reason. We're going to see in another paragraph from now, 2 paragraphs from now. Let's say I wanted to be an architect. What do I need to do? I need to know math. I need to know how to use my hands properly, how to think, how to see things, how to imagine. There are a lot of things I do that I need to do. Now, what if instead of doing that, I call up Shelley Levine and I say, hey, I got an idea. We're going to build a new project right over there in Efes Sheva. There's an empty land. Okay, here we go. And I'm going to be the advichal. I'm going to be the architect. I said, oh, that's so cool. I didn't know you could do that. Yeah, it is. It's so cool. Here's my design. I take a piece of graph paper and I start making little boxes and stuff. It's like, here it is. I didn't do anything. I just, I want to do it. Well, very nice. Go to school, learn, go online, take courses, get a degree, and then maybe you can do it. Same thing here, he's saying. You can't just say, I want to change. That's great. It's a good step, but you need to do something about it. And not just to learn about it, but put it into practice. Next paragraph. And since all people understand the necessity and the truth of doing this, of our requirement to purify ourselves and cleanse ourselves of our minds and everything else and how we deal with Hashem, skip a couple lines. It's a parenthetical statement. Go to the words ma na'aneh. I'm going to come back to those. Ma na'aneh b'yom tevchecha. What will we answer on the day of rebuke, meaning after 120 years? If we just kind of were lazy and we didn't do anything about it. And we just kind of set aside something that is so incumbent upon us and critical, that God himself is asking of us to do. Okay, I'm going to come back to the parenthetical statement in a minute, but I want to first explain what he just said. If you were in school and you were going to have a final exam, what would be the best thing you could have in advance to pass the test? The test. The answers would be even nicer, but at least the test, the questions, you know exactly what to focus on. I'm not saying about cheating. I'm not talking about that. I'm asking you a very simple question. What would be, I'm not saying to do it. I'm asking you, what would be the best thing you could do if you had a copy of the test? Correct. But what would be almost guarantee? Let's say you have 500 pages of studying and you know that these questions show you need pages 30 to 90, right? So now you know what to focus on. We are all going to be given a test. Well, not us because Mashiach's coming, but those people who have passed away after 120 years went before the Kisei HaKavod and they're all given a test. we don't have to guess what the questions are. The Gemara already tells us in advance what the test questions are. First question, Nasata v'natata be'emunah, did you deal faithfully in business? Notice, it doesn't say, did you put on tefillin? Did you light Shabbat candles? Did you treat your fellow properly? It says, did you deal faithfully in business? Why? Why is that the first question? There are 4 sections to Shulchan Aruch. The Orach Chaim, daily life, like, washing your hands, and tefillah, and not mezuzah, but chagim. You have Yoredeya, Yisur v'Heter, how kosher and non-kosher. You have Even HaEzer, which is very generally speaking, marriage and divorce, and you have Choshen Mishpat. What is Choshen Mishpat? Civil law, right? We don't have to say donkeys you have out there, but I'm saying cows, but is your car smashed into someone, you punch someone, you trip on someone's property, your water runs into somebody else's house, whatever it might be, that's civil law, that's Choshen Mishpat. So of all those sections of Shulchan Aruch, why is it that the first question asked before the Kisei HaKavod is, Nasata v'natata be'emunah, did you deal faithfully in business? And this goes right to the heart of this question, of this matter. Let me explain. A person can sit in their house, in front of YouTube, they could sit in the Beit Midrash and learn all about these things. They can learn about what it means, how do you daven the right way. They can learn about how you keep Shabbat. They can learn about all these other issues. And they can maybe even go into the shul and shuckle their brains out to their heads almost falling off. And they can put on the biggest talis, and the woman can have the biggest sheitel, and the man can have the longest bayis. But when it comes to money, when business, when you go out in the real world and you have to put these things into practice, that's the touchstone. That's where the true test is. You talked a good game. You davened well, you shuckled well, you learned Torah beautifully, and I mean it not even as in a rude way. You did your best. But when you get out in the real world and you have to put into practice, you're in business world. It's 4 o'clock. It's winter. You're not in Israel. You're in Galut, and you got to daven mincha somewhere. What do you do? Oh, all these people around me, not Jewish. What am I supposed to do now? In the olden days, you go by a telephone booth, right? Pick up the phone, right? What's that? Right, conference room. But when you actually put it into practice, he said, we know that, what are we going to say? B'yom ha'tochecha, the day of rebuke, the day we come before God. And he says, let me ask you a question. You knew that you were supposed to do this and this and this, right? Yeah. Why didn't you spend a few minutes learning about it? Like how you really should have done the mitzvot that I commanded you to do? Well, what are we going to say? Take a look. I'm going to come back. I'm going to skip purposely. I'm skipping that parentheses. You'll notice also it says, it is the ikar of Ma'ashem Elokeinu sho'el me'imanu, that which God asks of us. So even though he's going to quote a pasuk later, which you may get to today, if you have your phone, just take a quick look. In the Mesillat Yesharim group, I sent out a couple of psukim yesterday. Here is what he is referring to when he uses this word sho'el. Hashem asks of us. There are 2 psukim. The first one is from Micha, and the second one is from Dvarim, which are very similar psukim. If you don't have the phone, it's okay. I'll read them and explain. Actually, I'm going to do the second pasuk first because it chronologically came first from Moshe Rabbeinu. V'ata Yisrael, and now, O Israel, Ma'ashem Elokecha sho'el me'imach. What does God ask of you? He gives us a list. This is our job description of what it means to be a God-fearing Jew. Ki'im lirat Hashem Elokecha, to fear God, and we talked about that word last week. It doesn't just mean fear. Lalechet bechol drachav, to walk in his ways, and he's going to explain this pasuk. I'm not going to get into it in another page or 2, so I'm not going to get into that. Bechol drachav v'ulahava oto, and to love Hashem, v'la'avod et Hashem Elokecha, and to serve God bechol levavecha v'chol nafshecha, with all your heart and all your soul. The first pasuk now, which is from Micha. Higid lecha adam matov u'ma Hashem doresh mimcha. Tell a man what good for him and what Hashem requires of him. Ki imasot mishpat v'ahavat chesed v'atznei alechet im Elokecha. How do we walk with God? What do we do? And we have to act in a just way. We have to love chesed and walk in a way of tzniut. It does not mean dress length and elbows. It means to live a life of modesty instead of having the gigantic house with the car that costs 5 years of salary, and you have to have a wedding that's bigger than your next door neighbors because he spent $75,000 on flowers. I actually did a wedding once that they did that. $75,000 on flowers. I need to spend $80,000. That's a lack of tzniut. Here we have, this is the pasuk, and I believe that he's sending us to these couple psukim. When he uses this word, what is it Hashem wants? He says, look, I told you. It's right there in black and white. I told Moshe Rabbeinu, I told my Navi Micha, he told you, you should be reading these things, you should understand these things. Where were you? Next line. Hayitachen. Does it make any sense? Is it possible? Does it make any sense? Just he says a very practical question, that we spend so much time reading about and studying and learning about things that we are not required to have to do in our lives. Maybe even in pilpulim, which is like delving into even in Torah, which they can quote all the Rishonim and the Acharonim and everything else on a particular section of Gemara, for example, which maybe will result with nothing other than just having spun their wheels. A person spends their entire summer studying a certain halachot that have nothing to do with it. It's still chas v'shalom to say it's a waste of time. It's Talmud Torah. Talmud Torah keneged kulam. If you want to understand that, learn Tanya, Perek Lamed Vav and Zayin. I just finished it. That's why I know. But of course it is. But how does that affect you as an Eved Hashem? So we spend a lot of time doing these things, and I'm going to give you my comment on this in a moment. And those things that we are required to do for Hashem. A very great requirement. We leave it aside. To just our habits. That we say it's not supposed to be never, and then we leave it. It's just we kind of plod on our merry way in our regular day-to-day business. Now, notice what he said. He didn't say, "What are we wasting our time reading books of math and philosophy and science when you should be learning, how to be a good Jew?" He didn't say that. He said we shouldn't be spending all of our time spinning our wheels on doing things that it's Torah and leaving aside how to become a better Jew. What does that mean? I was sitting in Beit Midrash in Yeshivat Shalavim in 1976, sitting right next to a guy who was in his second year. I was in my first year. He was in his second year learning there, American. And somebody came over to ask him a question. And he said, "Don't bother me. I'm learning Rishonim right now." Now, what does that mean, first of all, in English? It means instead of learning the Gemara, you asked me a question of the Gemara. I'm learning the Rambam now. Don't bother me. He was so focused on trying to find every single detail, he lost the forest. What did it mean? He said, someone was asking him, "Could you just explain this word in the Gemara to me?" No, I'm busy learning Rishonim. Sometimes people get so caught up in their Torah learning to the extent that they put everything else aside. We have to understand that Torah is there. What does the word Torah come? Where is it? The horot. It's to teach. Horeh is a teacher. Moreh is a teacher. Horim are parents. Parents are teachers. All these are like horot lachem goshna. Lachem goshna. Where when the brothers are going to go down to Mitzrayim and Yaakov sends them down. The couple brothers go down first. They set up a Beit Midrash there. What are they going to learn in Beit Midrash? I don't know. They didn't have art school, so go figure. So that it's there to teach us, but we have to be receptive. We have to know. Now, if I learn where it says, for example, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, but I don't really know what that means, I can understand how does that fit in with this book? How does that fit in with my character traits? Then that's going to be a very big problem. I have to know that as well. Continuing. So also he uses this word, Lemitzvat anashim melumada. There's a very famous line, and when I say famous, for these who don't know, it means I just happen to know it. There's a famous pasuk in Tanakh, in the Navi, that says that Hashem, I'll say it in a nice way. Hashem doesn't need your korbanot. Does Hashem need your korbanot? No. Does Hashem need, the sprinkling of the blood and the fats and all this stuff? No. Does he need you shuckling in the shul now? No. He doesn't need any of this stuff. Hashem doesn't need anything. We need Hashem. So when a person was bringing a korban, but still went out and did a sin, when a person says, and still continues doing what they're doing, Hashem doesn't need this. He doesn't need the this. He needs your heart. Hashem, he says, and instead, people go, as the Navi says, they just work limudah. They just go on their regular way, following their habits of how they carry on with life without really starting to think about what it is they're doing. Does that mean when you daven with no kavanah, with no thought, it's meaningless? Of course not. Of course, there's still meaning to it. It comes before Hashem and it does what it has to do. But imagine the difference between saying to, let's say a person's engaged. No, just before they're engaged. And they say, the boy says to the girl, I love you. That's really so heartfelt. Or looks in her eyes and says, look, I've been meaning and wanting to say this now since the day I met you. I love you with all my heart. What's the difference? One's just kind of being yotzei, okay? They're just getting the words out their mouth. The others, they're just saying it with a full heart. And that's part of the difference. So when it comes to how we approach Hashem, also we're going to talk about. If we didn't look into and delve into what is true Yirat Hashem and all of its branches, all the subcategories, how do we acquire such a character trait? And also, it's not just enough, and this is going to be his thesis throughout the book, not just enough to know the character trait. It's not just enough to try to live by it. You also have to be aware of things that prevent you from achieving your goal. How are we going to do that? It will kind of like just go. It's going to go by the wayside, even though we know intellectually that we're supposed to do this. Similarly, when it comes to love, if we don't try to entrench it in our hearts, with strength, with power, we have to use all of those things that are at our disposal to try to get ourselves into love Hashem more, or even love of each other. Long question. It's a siman kriya, siman sheila. It's an exclamation point, a question mark. He's asking in a very rhetorical way and saying, look, we're very well aware of what we have to do. How does it happen? It doesn't happen in a vacuum. We have to do something about it in order to bring this dveikut, this connection to God. How do we purify our brains, our minds, if we don't make some attempt to clean it from the spiritual blemishes there? I don't know about you, but I've had a few good ideas in my life, Baruch Hashem, and I would hope all of us here have had some good ideas. But some of my better ideas tend to come to me right in the middle of Shemona Esrei. Like, I'm supposed to be davening, Hashiva, Shavtene, Kavari, Shonav, Yotzenu, Kavat, oh, wait, there goes a red balloon, right? So, case in point, I was davening, it was like 2 weeks before Rosh Hashanah, my first year as Rabbi Bishul, and I was in the middle of davening, and I don't remember where exactly. I was in the middle of Shemona Esrei, and I actually stopped because I had this brilliant idea of sending everybody a summons to court on 1st of Tishrei, that everyone was going, in the show was going to get an official legal summons, summoned by God to the court on 1st of Tishrei. And I ended up doing it. I'll tell you about that in a second. But that came to me in Shemona Esrei, and I stopped. I thought, like, well, that's a great idea. Hey, you remember, you got God here. Can you mind finishing the conversation first? Our brains wander. So if they wander in a natural way, how do we prevent it from when we really want to work on something? We have to tell ourselves to refocus. Just as an aside, I sent this out to every member of the show. I had the secretary, I asked her to handwrite everyone's name in the summons. I got an official summons from a court, a blank one. Put everyone's name in. They were summoned by God to his court, the address of the shul, 1st of Tishrei. The next day, I had a bunch of people come and say, oh, it sounds like I need to get a lawyer. I said, yes, because you really need to be in that mindset because you're coming before, it's a week of the judgment day, so to speak. But there was someone in the show who did not have a very good sense of humor. Called me up screaming. Now, I started at June 1st. This is August, September. What's wrong with you, Rabbi? I pay my bills. Why are you taking me to court? Whoa, did you even read what we sent? No, but I got a summons from the shul. Maybe read it next time. We're friends to this day, by the way. Baruch Hashem. Yeah. Okay. Anyways, V'hamidot. Let me see something here. Okay, let me just finish this paragraph. V'hamidot kulam atzichot kamo ken tikun ha'yeshara. Mi Yesharim. Who's going to straighten us out? Who's going to fix us? Im lo nasim lev alehem. If we don't pay attention to these things, it doesn't. And if we don't really very medakdek in this with a great dikduk, how do you say it in English? Exactitude. How's that? That's a real word, huh? Precision. Good. Hello, im ainu. Hello, im ainu al hadavar iyun amiti. If we really look into something with true introspection and looking at the matter, hayinu motziim oto al amito umetivim latzmenu. We would be able to find truth, would be beneficial for us, and umlamdim oto la'acherim umetivim lahem gam ken. Not only is what we are doing here today good for you, it's good for others. It does not mean you leave here and say, you see, shahani cute, you got to do that. It's not what it means at all. It means, number one, being a dugma ishit. How you become, how you comport yourselves, what you do in life as far as the things we're going to learn, and also with family and people who know you and would respect you and listen to what you have to suggest to others and say, hey, maybe you want to learn Mesillat Yesharim with me, or maybe you want to learn whatever it might be. That's another point he's trying to make. Now, I'm going to stop here, but just like a little preview. The pasuk that I quoted, we're going to get to next week, is going to kind of take it apart, and then going to give us the basis, the Braita, which is explained next week, but basically something from the Gemara, the basis of the entire book, where he came up with these topics that he was going to discuss, and then we'll get into hopefully the first stage of what is our purpose here in this world in general, and then the more specific. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you Bezrat Hashem next week.
Rabbi, can you add me to this group?